Okay, so let's start. Sorry about the delay. Welcome to everyone. Good evening. Buena tarde, buenas tardes, and good morning to Noam, because I think it's 10:30 or 10:20 in there. So good morning to you. It is my pleasure to be hosting this IALA CLT event with Noam Chomsky. Thanks a lot, Noam, for being here with us, to take the time to be with us. We know how busy you are, so we really appreciate it. I think Noam Chomsky needs no presentation. Although, I mean, it would take a lot of time to even barely introduce him. Actually, if someone here doesn't know who Noam is, I think you must have gotten the wrong link, guys. So this is, I mean, if you're here, I know you know this person. Okay, so the event, in order not to delay more things, the event is going to be organized in the following way. I sent questions concerning linguistic issues to Noam, and basically I'm going to ask all those questions one by one, and then he is going to reply. I will use the chat so that everyone can see the question, and then Noam will reply. At the end of the event, there will be no additional questions, so this is the way that things are going to go. We are going to start right away with the first one. If it's okay with you, Noam, we can go.
Okay.
Okay. So let me go with the first question. The first question was, as I told you, it was asked by undergrads. I think there are many students here. Some of them, they are PhD students, other are undergrads, and also I think there are some students that are still in the high school, but they wanted to attend anyway. So I think it's a good opportunity for them to get to know you and to see you. And actually, the first question, as I said, was asked by undergrads, and the question is as follows: to what extent does the nature of human thought follow from the properties of human language, including our arithmetic capacity and perhaps more delicate aspects such as our sense of morality, our feelings, etc.?
Well, there are, first of all, can you hear me? Yes. Actually, there are two aspects to this question. One of them is a whole tradition that goes back centuries. The other is a modern question that was raised by Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf primarily. It's called sometimes the Whorf hypothesis. They're quite different. The tradition simply regarded language as the instrument of thought. So there was no question, didn't arise. That's what language is. It's the instrument of thought. In modern terms, we can restate this by saying that there's a generative process which recursively enumerates an infinite array of structured expressions, each of which is the expression of a thought. That's what human thought is. Maybe there are other things, but we have no grasp of them. This, for major figures like Wilhelm von Humboldt, that constituted all of thought. Language simply was thought. Others took a less dramatic stand and said, maybe there's something else, but this is the kind of thought that we can comprehend. That's one view. That incidentally ended around the early 20th century. The structuralist, behaviorist developments in the early 20th century dropped this traditional view, and it was pretty much forgotten. It's been rediscovered more recently. Their approach was that language is a community project of some kind. For Saussure, it's a social contract among a community. For Leonard Bloomfield, it's a matter of habit and training. And for philosophy of language, it's mostly an extension of communicative abilities of animals. That was a totally different point of view. I think the traditional view has been reconstituted within modern generative grammar. I think there's a lot of merit to it. And I think we can, in fact, simply say that to the extent that we have any grasp of thought of what it is, it's what achieves internal linguistic expression. May not be articulated, doesn't have to be in sound. The tradition held that language was, the phrase was audible thought. Actually goes back to Aristotle, but we now know it doesn't have to be audible. It can be any sensory motor system. It can be sign, it could be touch. Sound is convenient for many reasons, but not essential. So there's an internal system that constructs thoughts. It's going on all the time in our heads. We don't have any conscious access to it, but we can see how it ends up showing up either in internal consciousness, usually in fragments, or sometimes in externalized form, like what we're doing now. So that's one aspect of the relation between language and thought, the deepest one, I think. The other, which comes from Sapir and Worf, which may be what the questioner is asking about, I'm not sure, is the idea that the nature of our language determines the way we think. Our language determines how we look at the world, how we interpret it, and so on and so forth. That was put forward most forcefully by Benjamin Lee Whorf back in the 30s and 40s. It's been investigated seriously for about 70 years now, since Eric Lenneberg's work in the early 50s. Almost nothing. It's very hard to find any empirical evidence for that. Other cultures, various cultures, have different ways of talking about things, but when you look at it more closely, it all seems to come back to the same, pretty much the same conceptual structures. There's a very important paper by great linguist who we linguists all know, the late Ken Hale, great anthropological linguist who studied Australian indigenous languages intensively, others, and he showed pretty convincingly that even when they didn't seem to have ways of saying what we said, they had other ways of doing it, which are they had same conceptual structures, numbers, colors, and so on. So there's some slight evidence, very slight, that the language you speak has some influence on the way people look at the world, but it's really quite thin. Now, what about morality and feelings? Actually, there's interesting work on that too, but again, it has this dual aspect. One question is there some deep connection between the nature of language and the nature of universal moral systems? That's one kind of question. The other kind of question is whether our particular language has some influence on our moral judgments and values. On the second question, I think the results are pretty much like the Whorf hypothesis. It doesn't look like there's much, if anything, there. It seems that moral systems like language, like thought, are basically a common human possession with variations at the fringes, but nothing very fundamental. With regard to the first question, there is interesting work. No time to go into it, but if you're interested, there's a very important book by John Michael, he's a philosophy student who wrote an important book on the nature of critical analysis of reactions to John Rawls's famous theory of justice. Went on to argue that, in fact, there is a kind of a grammar of morality which has features similar to the grammar of language, which topic he knew pretty well. He's now teaching law at Georgetown University, if you want to contact him. His work was taken up by others, especially Mark Hauser, fine primatologist, linguist, who went on to do experimental work with both with children and with comparative work with different cultures, trying to unearth common features of core morality and to show that they share some fundamental properties with human language, maybe based on the same combinatorial operation, something like merge. There's interesting work on this, which I think is promising. It may indicate why the several human systems that seem to have very similar computational properties. Language is the core one, but there's also arithmetic, shares many of the properties. Musical systems, it's another cultural universal. Every culture that's known has some kind of musical systems and genres, and those two seem to share some of these fundamental properties. The other ones are moral sense. These are very interesting scientific questions and worth looking into, but the other category of questions about how language, morality vary from culture to culture, and how language may shape these is, there's something there, but it seems pretty peripheral. The striking issues are the uniformity of the systems, which we see with regard to language too. You go back 50 or 60 years in the structuralist tradition, it was assumed explicitly that languages can vary in almost any possible way. It was called the Boasian hypothesis. It looks like that on the surface, but anything you don't understand looks hopelessly complex. The more you come to understand it, the more you see deep uniformities. So, for example, in biology, it was assumed at roughly the same time that organisms can be of almost any possible kind, and each one has to be studied in its own terms. It's now known that there are very few possible life forms, very few, and they all seem to be based on very narrow, more or less generative principles, which actually have some similarities to what we see in language. The more, in general, the more that's learned about any topic, the less it looks like chaos, and the more you see some fundamental structures and uniformities behind it. And that's happened with language. It's beginning to happen with other aspects of human cognition. It's my sense of where things are going. Incidentally, this is not the general view. This is not the general consensus. So you should be aware of that. In biology, by now it is, but not in the soft sciences.
Okay, thank you.